Everyone. I am going to get us started with a little bit of I'll do a little bit of a slow entry here just to give everyone a chance to log in, and then I will turn it over to our presenter today. First of all, my name is Tom Reed. I am the program manager for the Energy and Manufacturing in Appalachia program. And just a second. And I just want to welcome you all. If this is your first time joining us, we do put together webinar information programs, usually about twice a month. And this is the third of our series of energy supply chain overviews. So we're excited to have you join us today. If you have not visited us on our previous webinars on this series, we have one on natural gas carbon capture and one on nuclear. They all stem from the same idea of a report that's aimed to help a manufacturer to make a go, no-go decision on, is this a supply chain area that's a good fit for me? What are the important pieces of information for me as a company to know about this industry? So we really try to focus in on every piece of information we share with you is something to help you in that regard. There's a lot of great information out there about these different energy segments, but we think this is the most important pieces of information for a manufacturer. Upcoming beyond today, we have one on our first of four focusing on AI data centers. This first one's going to be an overview of the whole segment as we see it, and then there'll be three that follow over the next couple of months that will dig into various sections for manufacturers in AI data centers. On August 21st, we're going to focus on battery storage, and then on September 11th, the natural gas upstream is going to be focused. We're also going to have a couple of categories under natural gas that we'll talk about as well. So, and then you can see, if you look down below, that we have many more that we are lining up. We have been lucky enough to get some good experts and knowledgeable people in each of these areas that can put this information together in a very similar format. And so we are building out. If you go to our website, wemakeithere.org/energy, we are putting this information in, and over the next few weeks, we are going to be building out even more with a separate landing page for each of these energy segments. So please visit and learn more. But let's get focused on today's topic, which is onshore wind. And I just put a link in the chat. If you have not already downloaded the report, please do so. This whole webinar is to help you to understand what's in the report and help you to use that to your best advantage. But so I encourage you to download that. You can forward that to other people. It's for you to have for your needs, and then certainly reach back to those of us at the EMA program. We're happy to help you with any questions you have, any assistance in helping you to further your progress. So today, our presenter also happens to be someone who's working closely with the EMA program, and he heads up and puts together all of these great webinar programs. So Matt is doing double duty today. So Matt Henderson for Henderson Consulting is going to talk to you all about the onshore wind. And I also want to give a shout out to another one of our EMA partners, which is Reimagine Appalachia. Amanda and Wendy work very closely with us, and they provided a lot of good information about the wind industry that Matt was able to use and put into his report. So I encourage you to reach out to any of the three of them with any questions concerning wind and, to talk about that. Of course, it's been up and down politically. It depends on where the focus is, but I think there's always going to be an opportunity for some clean, reliable energy, and there are some great places for it. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Matt, and thanks for pulling this together.
Okay, thanks, Tom, and welcome to everybody for being joining us. As Tom mentioned, he did share the link, so I would encourage you to please take a look and download the report. Today, I'm going to walk through bits of the report, but I'm not going to show everything because I just want to give an overview, some resources, and then encourage you, as Tom sent that link, to download the report and dig into it more. There's a lot of great links, and that's a one thing we're doing with all these reports. As Tom mentioned, we have a landing page. We're providing updated information as it comes out, and then there's a tremendous amount of links to other resources where we sourced a lot of this information as well. So we're going to walk through, you see the agenda. I want to talk a little bit about the industry, where it's at, take a look at it from a global and a localized perspective, some of the components and, some of those resources out there. And Tom touched on a few of the challenges currently for, the onshore wind segment industry right now, but we'll talk through some of those and see where we're going, with the industry out there. So I would encourage you, if you do have questions, submit them in the Q&A pod there. We'll cover as many as we can, relevant questions. We had a few submitted, which are incorporated into today's presentation there. So let's take a snapshot, see where we're at, with wind energy. So when you look at it from a global perspective, you can see it's about 8% of the global electricity generation at the end of 2024. And when we look at what company or countries, have a large percentage of their total electricity from wind. So this is just looking at percentage of wind that generates their electricity. And these are the larger countries. We do have some countries that are above 50%, 60%, but have a smaller footprint, I'll say, in terms of energy use. The one thing I do as we jump into this too, we're going to talk a lot of numbers. We'll talk about percentages, terawatt hours. We're going to talk about megawatts. So I just up front just want to define those for everybody, just so we're all on the same page. So when we're talking megawatts, so that's think about that's the ideal condition what a plant could generate. So if you have an 800 megawatt plant, perfect conditions, it can generate 800 megawatt hours and megawatts in a day. The reality is we know no source is going to produce 100%. So when we talk about terawatt hours, think of that as that's a reality. That is what a plant produced in a given set period of time. And we're going to talk through some of those numbers here in a second. But when we look at, say, some of the larger industrial countries, you see where the United Kingdom, Germany, and Sweden are all, above 20%, and United Kingdom producing 30% of their total electricity is from wind. And you can see where we're at in the United States at 10%. But of course, you have to take a look at the size of the country and the size of their energy portfolio. So while United States and China produce roughly 10%, so every 1 out of every 10 megawatt hour or terawatt hour produced is from wind. China, you can see, is a behemoth. They're producing twice as much wind generation as the United States. And then you can see as we go further down, the United States and China are by far the largest users of wind energy across the globe. China is continuing to grow. You can see they just about 990 terawatt hours. So again, this is actual generation, what they produced in 2024. And then in terms of raw numbers, United States is number 2, and you can see everybody else really pales in comparison. So by percentages, again, United States, China, about 10%. Interestingly, too, we know China continues to grow in all sectors. They're building all kinds of power plants, from wind to coal to gas, solar. But from a wind perspective, you saw in Q1 of this year, their percentage increased to about 13%. Now, wind is, as I call it, seasonal. In March, April, the spring months generally are producing more wind energy. But China last year in the same quarter produced about 11%. So not only is China producing more power, but their power did definitely increase from last year. So when we were talking here, and we did identify this report as onshore wind energy. When you look at wind energy, it is about 99% is onshore wind energy right now. When we look at what's installed, and we're going to look at here, let's look at some of the United States numbers. When we look at what is installed in the United States for offshore wind, it's around 240 megawatt hours. So there's not a tremendous amount right now of offshore. But when we look at, from New York, when we look at their offshore project, Empire One, they're looking to have about 810 megawatts of installed offshore wind energy. So again, that's definitely a tremendous project. It's had some starts and stops, but currently it is moving forward, and that would again, almost 3 to 4x times install how much offshore wind energy we have in the United States. Again, focusing on the onshore right now, when we look here, we see, again, 10% is produced or is used in the United States for wind energy. So again, installed capacity right now, roughly at the end of Q1 in 2025, about 155 gigawatts or 155,000 megawatt hours. And comparing that across the board to some of the other popular energy producers, natural gas, coal, solar, nuclear. I'm going to talk about later of, some of the constraints, I say, with wind and some of the technologies is the capacity factor. So, when you look at 155,000 megawatt hours, we know that wind is not always blowing, from a solar, the sun, and coal, natural gas, they're not always operational. So even though we see coal has, about 50,000 megawatt hours more, wind and coal are producing about the same amount of electricity for the United States. And then from the other side, when you look at nuclear, we're talking, nuclear is producing a little bit more than wind and coal because of their uptime and utilization factor out there. So, I think a lot of this might make sense especially when we look at a few maps coming up here. But when we look at installed capacity, we see where Texas, Iowa, Oklahoma, and Kansas are leading the ways. I do believe, I didn't cue Tom up, I believe there's a song about the wind blowing in Oklahoma, but it makes sense. When we look at the plains out there, there's a lot more consistent and higher wind speeds out there. So looking at the top 4 or 5 states in the United States, they're producing roughly about half of the total, or have about half of the wind energy installed out there. So, again, this is a map that I think speaks volumes, so when we're looking at this map, the pink and the purple and the orange, that's a higher wind speed. So this map took into account, it looked at about 80 meters up, what's the average annual wind speed, and you can see down the plains there where they have an average higher wind speed. And if you look at the chart, the purples, the reds, the blues, that's the higher wind speed out there. So it makes sense why we saw Texas, Oklahoma, Iowa in terms of the most installed, because this is where the wind speed on average is higher. It's not just higher, but it's also more consistent out there. So when you're looking at installing a wind turbine, you want to maximize how much electricity you're going to generate throughout the year. That's why we're seeing some of this development take place out there. You see where we're at in Appalachia, the green, some yellows, a few, higher in the peaks and, some of the ridges and stuff we have across the Appalachia. You do see, some more higher wind speed. And that's why when you're going to see wind installed across where we're at, mostly it's going to be up in the tops of the mountain ridges and stuff. We're going to have higher wind speed. There is, and I know we were hoping to have the gentleman with us, but there's some companies working on called a low wind speed technology, where they're taking into account, okay, well, we have a 4 to 5 average wind speed here in Pennsylvania. So we need technology, we need a turbine that can generate speed at those lower wind speeds. And, it's coming. I say there's some proven technology. The implementation of it is taking some time, but the key with that is it's not only going to open up, I say, these greens and these yellow markets, but if you take that technology and then you apply it to these other areas, where you can then increase the capacity factor. So instead of producing, 40% of the time, the lower wind speed technology will then maybe increase that to 50 to 60% out there. So, so when we look at market opportunities and diversification and, where are the challenges, it is the majority of the country, but say by land mass, we don't have the technology or right now that can profitably generate wind electricity from wind right now. But I say it's coming, and it's something that is definitely an opportunity when you have some of these early adopters and these companies out there that are really trying to push the envelope. So this map or this chart, and you see the map of the United States in the lower corner out there, is looking at median wind plant capacity factors. So consider this if you're an investor and you want to go out and you're going to build a wind farm. Where are you going to go that you're going to see, not only higher wind speeds? So when we see the upper and the lower plains here have traditionally higher wind speeds from what we saw in the previous map, but you're also going to see the capacity factor is higher throughout the year. So the dips in these lines you're seeing at 20-25% in the summertime, so the wind isn't blowing as much, isn't blowing as fast. But there's less, I would say, of a delta where you're going to see the highs, the peaks, and the valleys, around the plains out there. So that speaks a lot to, again, where we're seeing it, not only a higher wind speed, but also from these are businesses out there looking to make money, but from a consistency standpoint, they're going to see in these plains areas where the more wind is more consistent, I say, throughout the year. There is also, we're going to talk policy and, incentives. I mean, you see where California's at, it has a tremendous, increase there in the summertime, a little bit opposite of what we see the other places. But in the January, the first quarter and the last quarter in the year, you're seeing a lot lower wind speeds, but you also have some incentives and some mandates in, say California for more renewables, and with that, some more subsidies and some more assistance out there for developers or companies to put wind farms in out there. So, we know 100% that policy and public pressure do push some more development out there, and with that too, when you have some of that support and you have some of that demand for it, it's also pushing these technologies. As I mentioned previously, people looking to solve the problem to installing wind turbines in low wind speed area, people have that incentive and have that push to drive that technology and increase those opportunities. So I always look at this and I think of a Verizon commercial with the bars out there, so we're looking here at these are just additions. So from 2004 to the latest I could find was 2020 at the time, but you see the ebbs and flows where 2004 very little additions out there, and then you saw it increase out there to 2008, 2009, roughly 10 gigawatts of added capacity. Again, ups and downs, and you could very well look on there, parallel to these years, look at the policies, look at who, the administration, look at some of the state initiatives out there where you're seeing some push and some assistance out there for people to develop new technology. And also you're seeing, as we in the latter part of the teens, I would say up into where we're at now, is you're seeing more consistent additions to wind turbines, generation capacity added, where you're seeing the peak there or the decline in 2017 was roughly 6 gigawatts, where the previous 10 years that would have been I'd say a really good year. So we're at a period now, if we look at this map, we're seeing declining additions out there, but again, as we're talking about, say, some of the challenges and some of the obstacles out there, this is looking over 20 years, and we see that the capacities are increasing over time, so the decrease every year from year to year is lower. So I want to jump into some of the supply chain components and, looking at from obviously from a manufacturing standpoint. I say when you look at where are things produced, where are they made from a U.S. standpoint, it's pretty strong. We have, like I said, it shows approximately 72% of the components are manufactured in the United States. So I'd say when you look at other industries across the board, that's pretty good. This is one of the larger percentages out there, and a couple of reasons out there where the U.S. was a growing wind industry, renewables push. You can see from 2007, where just roughly 25% of the supply chain was domestic, to today over 70%. So you've had increased technology improvements. I'll say you've had some support out there from large companies putting some funding behind it, as well as government and state, and you've in business opportunities where companies have come in and said, hey, we want to domesticate the supply chain, we want to limit, say, some of the risks right now. When we look at here in the present, tariffs are a huge hurdle to if you don't have a domestic supply chain. But when you have 70% of it is domesticated, you can you have a little bit less of that impact out there. The other part, when you look at where the supply chain is, not surprisingly, it is close to where where the turbines and where the installation is. I think if we've all seen one of the large the blades going down the highway, it's very expensive not only to ship overseas to come here, but very expensive to ship even regionally, because it's logistically challenging to get it to especially a lot of the places top of the ridges and where we're at, in Appalachia. But where the supply chain is in the Midwest and in the Plains area, you do see a lot of that. You do see some in Massachusetts, and some of the larger companies out there have multiple locations and multiple hubs for it out there. So again, when we're going to dig into the components here. Again, I'm going to encourage you to download the report, because we go into a lot more detail on the components, what they're used for, where they're at, and some of the opportunities. So when you break down a wind turbine, I'm going to say this, and it's not to say oversimplify, but it's a relatively simple process, or simple how the wind energy is generated out there, and the components in there, when you look at them, there's none of that, say, that secret sauce in there. The secret sauce is, how do you get these product or these components to be more efficient, to not heat up, to not break down, to generate more electricity over time. So that's where some of the secret sauce is, where a company can make, their components can be better, they can be lighter. I mentioned from an installation standpoint, it can be very expensive and very heavy, trucking it there. But when you're looking at lighter weight components, it's cheaper, and the durability will be longer out there as well. So if we go to, again, looking at the snapshot from our report, this is just one of about 6 pages I think we have out there, where we're looking at what are the different components and what are they used for. So again, I'd encourage you just to dig into this and say, hey, you know what, I'm involved in brakes for in this industry or another industry, or I do bearings. Bearings obviously are used across all types of manufacturing and energy segments out there. So this will give you a good snapshot of, say, okay, this is where they're used, how they're used, and then we have other resources in there that can tell you what's the special way that, or say, how are they used in the onshore wind turbines. And I'd say, bearings and, some of these components are the disposables, and are some of the areas that the industry is looking for improvement for longer life and, less maintenance. These turbines are, 80, maybe 100 meters tall. So you can imagine getting in there to repair, to fix, or just general maintenance by no means is an easy task. So the less operations or the less maintenance required on some of these components, the better off they are for long run, and more of a value add, I would say, to the manufacturers and installers out there. I'd say there is this is not a new industry by any means in the United States. So there's a tremendous amount of resources out there to go out and learn. American Clean Power Association would probably be one of the leading associations out there. They've say have absorbed additional trade groups out there, and they have tremendous amount of information. Though these top ones might be a little bit more in the policy and the advocacy side, but they're going to give you some information on what are individual states doing, what is the push out there, what are their incentives, how can how and where does it make sense to go out for some of these, to install or to look at some of the emerging markets out there. We also list in our report a fair amount of the funding, the research, developers, the U.S. DOE, Office of Wind Energy is still out there. The site is still live. I say that because honestly, there have been some websites and some stuff through the Department of Energy that have moved or been taken down. But the Wind Energy Technology Office through DOE has a tremendous amount of information. And if there's new funding opportunities for research and development or tax credits, they typically would fall or show up under the DOE. And some of the big players out there, NextEra, GE, they have great resources, and most of the companies or the developers and the manufacturers out there, have a pretty good supplier portal. If you want to work with a company, you can sign up, get your company listed with them, and as RFQs come out, get notification for it. So I want to walk through, say, some of the challenges and some of the next steps out here, and then we'll get through some questions and answers here. So I just say, again, wind is, to generate electricity. That's a use when you compare it to, say, some of the other fuels out there. Wind is, it's generating electricity, and you have to go to the source. So where the wind is blowing is where you have to install the turbines. So you can be constrained if you're far away from the grid, or getting the grid, the power cables, getting that electricity from the source site, to where it's going to be used. So that limits it, especially where we're at, let's say in Appalachia. And with a question out there, when we see what's going on in Pennsylvania or in the basin here, most of the wind turbines that are installed are on top of ridges, because again, we're limited with low wind speed. The higher wind speed is going to be on top of the ridges out there. So it's a struggle, a challenge at times, because of the say some of the pushback, from the view shed, but also from getting the electricity off of the mountaintops into the grid, hooking up to the grid. So where you will see it is it's going to be closer to maybe where there's a power line or there's an existing rights of way where you can get the electricity, say, off the ridges down into the to the areas where it's going to be used. And I say it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I'd say that we know the current administration now has downplayed the efforts and the support through some of the tax credits for renewables right now. But this is a very long-term play, in terms of wind energy. As you saw in the graph out there, where we're at from 2004 to today, we're in a more sustainable period where we're going to see continuing additions of wind energy. In the period we're at right now, again, it is going to slow down because of public interest, government support behind it out there. But it's not definitely going away. And then looking long term, there's still a tremendous amount of opportunities for it out there. Again, same thing, strong and consistent speeds. That's why, again, we're seeing the higher wind speeds and more consistent wind speeds. Again, that's where we see the development taking place out there. This last one I have out there, and this goes back to the technology. And, I think with, AI, and Tom mentioned we're doing a fair amount of work in AI through the project. With AI coming on, I think this is not going to just help from, our Google searches or anything out there, but this is going to be applied to everywhere out there. And right now, the capacity factor. So when we have a 100 megawatt wind farm, the capacity factor says about 34 to 36% of that is generated into electricity. So if we can across the board, looking across the United States, if we can increase that from 34 to even 38 or to 40, that's going to make those projects from a financial standpoint more doable. And this is where we need to increase the technology of the capacity, increasing that low wind speed, or increasing how, even with the wind speed we have, how much energy we can generate from those wind turbines out there. I did mention earlier, when we looked at, from a nuclear standpoint, nuclear has less installed capacity. But when you look at the capacity factor, 92 to 93% of a nuclear site is always generating electricity. Again, it's a little different. You can't just turn on and off a nuclear reactor. But that's what they're competing against. So when we're looking across the board at where can we get our electricity, these are some of the limiting factors out there. So, we do need that research and development, and we need that support out there so we can continue to increase the capacity, that capacity factor out there, which not only will, like I said, open up more markets, but also, give a bigger piece of the pie for, wind generation and wind turbines out there. So, we're at the point now where, we've got, wind farms, 20, 25 years old that are coming to the end of life. And then as they get replaced, for those capacity factors back then were in the teens. So now we're able to install they can install new wind turbines in the same location and generate maybe 2x as much, 2 to 2.5 times as much power at the same location. And I do expect to continue to see that, over time. Going back to maybe my third bullet point, it's a marathon, not a sprint. It's going to happen. It's just going to take time. And when it's talking about AI and, maximizing some of these efficiencies out there will be key. So with that, Tom, I see you back on. I do see we had a couple questions, but now if there's any questions, we're glad to take them.
Yeah, absolutely. And first, let me just say, I got a comment that maybe some people are having trouble typing in the chat, and maybe there's something disabled. So if you are having trouble typing your question into chat, you can also click under Q&A. That seemed to work for others. So feel free to go either place. I've got both of them up, and so if you type your question, and I will be glad to read it back to Matt. And it does look like maybe he was able to get that fixed in the time it took me to state it. But so that's good, Matt. So the first question we have here is, how active is the wind industry at the Appalachian region, PA, Ohio, West Virginia, New York, and both from a manufacturing and an installation perspective?
I'd say from both perspectives, we don't have a whole lot of the manufacturing here for the main components, the big components, because the market is more in the Midwest. The installed, or where we're seeing the utilization of wind, is on the ridges, on the turbines. So we do have a fair amount of the ridges and turbines are installed here across Appalachia. What we did have was some early adopters across Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Eastern Ohio. So some of those technologies in New York are getting to the end of life. So we're going to see, some new technologies installed there. Honestly, one of the limiting factors, as you mentioned with policy, Tom, in the beginning, is that tax credit. There's a tax credit that companies can use, a 30% tax credit. Renewables are in the new bill are limited to installation by the end of 27. So some of these projects, as we know, take any type of project take numerous years to get installed. So I do think that's going to slow down the installation of some of these projects.
Yeah. And, you also mentioned, just again, to point out maybe a couple of outliers, but to just show, even when maybe this industry isn't the area where the most focus is, we do see some manufacturers out there who are carving a path for themselves. You mentioned the low wind turbine company that is in the area. I know there's also a company that's working on like chopping up the old blades, because it's difficult to send those to landfills because they are so large, and even just transporting them. Well, once their useful life is over, sometimes it's easier to take out what essentially looks like a giant paper shredder and shred that giant blade up into smaller pieces that are much easier to recycle, to dispose of, to transport. So yeah. So while this isn't, the Appalachia is a hub of almost every kind of energy manufacturing. This is probably one of those that we don't have as much dominance as others. There are some companies who are, making a pretty successful go at different parts of it. So
Yeah.
something to consider. Another question I have. Let's see. Let me go back to this other question I just see. Do you have any suggestions on the service side of wind farms? It seems none of the people are near the wind farms.
Yeah, so obviously we focused on the manufacturing side of it, but I will say in our research and looking at the developer site and the operators, Nextera is one of the largest operators. They have some great information in portals on their website for if you are a service provider. So the same links we have for manufacturing, you can go to their websites and you can find out some of that information on the service side of it.
Great. Yeah. And so, yeah, the last thing that I see, unless somebody adds another question, and this is just something that as you were walking through this, I was thinking about, and you kind of answered this, but I thought it would be good to maybe point it out. So as you mentioned, the report does one of the things that you put this together, and most of our other reports are following suit, is that we have pages of NAICS code. So even if you don't know as a manufacturer what your specific NAICS code is, and I would suggest that you do look it up because it's not too hard. If you just Google NAICS codes, you can input kind of what you manufacture and pretty quickly find out what your 6-digit code is. But if not, I know you have it laid out where you kind of give a description of what the NAICS code is as well. But I think that's a great place for manufacturers to look with this report. So let's say they look in and they find, gearbox. Maybe they look and say, this looks a lot like the kind of gearbox that we make already, or we definitely have that capacity. We have the ability to make gearboxes like that. What would you suggest the company do once they've discovered that kind of potential opportunity? What would be next steps?
Yeah, so great. As you mentioned, yeah, you can look up by NAICS or by description. And if you find that out, I would say like American Clean Power Association and all these groups have trade shows. And I'll say, even though, maybe wind isn't the favor now, but renewables or energy in general, of course, are. And you can go to these trade shows, will either have, technical conferences or, exhibitors or technical papers where they are highlighting, as you mentioned, you make this gearbox and you think your gearbox is better. These papers and these websites and these trade groups highlight where those challenges are, where those pinch points are, what they need to get, to improve the technology out there. So again, as Tom mentioned, search through the PDF by NAICS code or by description. You see what it's used for, and then if you think you have something, take a look at those sites or reach out to any of us on the team. We'll be glad to help you out and dig into it a little bit more and come up with some suggestions and some reports. But there's a fair amount of even there's a lot. This technology isn't going away, and when somebody can develop something that's a better mousetrap, that's what's going to continue to move this industry forward. So
Great. Yeah, no, I think you definitely hit that, and that's definitely the goal. Is we want people to pretty quickly be able to see, is there something here worth digging into a little further?
yeah.
So in a short period of time, you should be able to, either kind of rule yourself out if it's not a good fit, or at least figure out what maybe the next steps are. And you answered that really well. So again, I did go ahead and put up in chat the website, which is the beginning part of to download for the report. But if you just want to go straight to the website, you can see the contact information. You can reach out to us. You can see all of the other tools and information that the Energy and Manufacturing in Appalachia program offers. So yeah, thank you, Matt. I think this was great. And like I said, there are going to be many more of these energy segments for companies who want to learn a little bit more. And please reach out to us if you have any questions.